Welcome back to Book Club Preview. Today we're looking at To Kill a Mockingbird, Chapter 2. And this chapter starts off with Dill leaving to go back home. He only spends his summers in Macomb County, and then he goes back to his mom, he has a dad, but his dad is gone, I guess. So Scout is pretty sad that Dill's going, but then she realizes, oh my goodness, one more week and I'm gonna start first grade. She's so excited, and for a year or more she's been going to kind of their tree house, and she had little binoculars or telescope, and she would spy on the school kids playing around, watching her brother play and just wondering what kind of games and fun is going on. So she is so excited to start school. And the first day of school, Jim walks her down to school, shows her where her room is, and says, hey, look, at home we play. At school, we're strangers. Don't talk about the games we played. Don't come to me asking for anything. Don't embarrass me. And so he kind of set some rules for her. And she agrees. And then she sits down for first grade for the first time. And they have a nice, beautiful young teacher. Or I don't know about nice, but a very beautiful young teacher. And they're sitting there, and the teacher's trying to teach him a lesson. And Scout here already knows everything. And so Scout actually gets into trouble because she already knows how to read. And this sounds so funny probably to us, but back then, 60, 70 years ago, education was different. And so the teacher says, now listen here, Jane Louise, you tell your father not to teach you reading anymore. And Scout says, my dad never taught me to read. He just comes home and sits down and reads a paper. He never taught me anything. He's like, well, where did you learn how to read? I don't know. And so the teacher says, your dad taught you, and you need to tell your dad to stop. And so then she goes home, and she's angry. She's upset. But there's nothing she can do. The next day, she comes back, or maybe several days later, and there the teacher is teaching some words and letters and things like that. Scout is so bored, she starts writing a letter to Dill. And Jean Louise, I can't remember her name, sorry. But the teacher comes and says, Jean Louise, I thought I told you to tell your father not to teach you anymore. And she says, what's going on? Your dad taught you to write, and now he needs to stop. My dad didn't teach me how to write. If anything, it was Petunia, or not Petunia. I can't remember her name. I'm going to say Petunia. The homekeeper in their home, who would say on rainy days, listen, if you can write this out and match it perfectly, I'll give you a special dessert. And so Scout would get really focused, and she'd do her best, but Petunia would always be disappointed, and I think not give her dessert, which makes Scout hate her even more. But it comes to lunchtime, and so the teacher says, okay, if you're gonna go home for lunch, raise your hand. If you brought your lunch, go ahead and put it on your table. And so everyone does this, except for one boy, Walter Cunningham. And so the teacher goes, Walter, did you forget your lunch? And Walter says, yeah, I just forgot it. Yup. After she asks him several times. And then she's like, well, okay, here's a quarter. You can pay me back tomorrow. You can go buy yourself a lunch. And Walter says, no, ma'am. No, thank you. And she says, Walter, take the coin. No. Walter, take the coin. No. Walter, take the coin. No, ma'am. And finally, all of the students are looking at Scout saying, come on, Scout, tell her. Scout kind of looks around. Okay, she's had some conversations with the teacher before, so she stands up. Mrs. Something, Walter's a Cunningham. what does that have to do with anything? He's a Cunningham, ma'am. Still doesn't know anything. And then Scout tells us about the Cunninghams. The Cunninghams are farm people who lost a lot of money, I'm guessing, during the Depression. And so even though they had some land, the government was trying to take some of it away from them because they couldn't pay their debts. But the Cunninghams, even though they were very, very, very poor, they were still very honorable. And they didn't take money from anyone or anything from anyone unless they could pay it back. So Walter was not going to take that quarter because he knew he couldn't pay it back. And the Cunningham father actually needed Atticus to help him in the court. And so he couldn't pay Atticus anything, but he said, Atticus, I will pay you back someday. And Atticus says, hey, don't worry about it. And then over the summer, they would get like fruit or seeds or firewood, something like that. So everyone, all the kids already know this, okay, that the Cunninghams don't have money, but yet they pay back when they need to for something. So then Jean Louise says, ma'am, you're shaming him. He can't pay you back, and you're shaming him by embarrassing him in front of the class. Now, when this happens, the teacher says, Jean Louise, come up here. Hold out your hands. And so she kind of holds out her hands, and she thinks the teacher's going to spit in her hand to make some promise. But she holds out her hand, and then she goes, whack, 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 whack. And then makes Jean Louise go into the corner. And no one knows what's going on. Like, Jean Louise is just shocked. She doesn't know what's happened. She just told the truth. And then after a few moments, the class realizes that Scout just got whipped. And so they all start laughing and hollering. And finally, one of the 6th grade teacher comes in, who's really scary. And she opens the door, and I think she says, now listen here, you kids. If I hear another word from this classroom, I'm going to burn you down, right? Just like, I'm going to kill you. And the kids go, they just freeze. And then she says to the teacher, please keep these kids under control. We can't study. We can't focus in on, the 6th graders can't focus in on their lesson. And then the bell rings. All the kids run off to lunch. And the teacher starts crying. And Scout thinks, you know what? I kind of want to comfort her. But she just whipped me. And she hasn't been treating me very nicely. So she kind of gets what she deserves. And Scout takes off. And that is how the chapter ends. Vocabulary. Okay, let me talk about this for a moment. There are so many different expressions from the South in America that are hard to understand without looking at the whole sentence or knowing that culture. So if you run into any of these, please let me know. Or if there are vocabulary words you don't know, please let me know too. And you can write just a comment in the chat quickly so that way we can remember those. Because if we meet together and like, oh, I had one and I forgot it. I don't want that to happen. Because if you don't know it, the other people don't know it. So when you write it down, that helps everyone. So our first word here, persons of no background. And this is so funny. She's like, these people were professors and accountants and lawyers or whatever. People of no background. Meaning they didn't come from good blood. Their parents weren't special people in the city. They didn't have a background that people knew of. I know your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents. They're just some doctor or something that got an education and kind of earned a degree, but they didn't have the blood, the heritage. Immune to imaginative literature. In the classroom, the teacher reads a book, but there's no pictures in the book. She's just reading it. And Scout, she likes the story. It's great. There's mice talking to each other. But a lot of the other students, they're just farm kids. So they would just spend their days working in the farm. They weren't used to using their imagination, so they were bored out of their minds. What else we got here? Contented myself. Okay. Made myself happy or relaxed myself. And she contented herself by saying something mean or snotty. Not really, really bad, but just a little pinch. And she actually even says kind of a bad word. She says, that woman, I don't even want to say it, D-A-M-N. She really hates the teacher. But in any case, she contented herself by saying something. Entailment. I had to look this up because this is a legal word. Entailment means when you're trying to give your property to your next bloodline. Okay, let's say I die and I want to give things to my wife or my daughter. That's entailment. And when I do that, there's actually some money I should pay to the government or some documents and papers. And so the Cunningham father, he was caught up with this legal rope that he had to get through, but he needed help from Atticus. That leaves us with our discussion question. Have you ever been punished for trying to do something right? Just like Scout and Walter Cunningham. And of course, please make your own discussion question. That is all the time that we have for today. But thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Book Club Preview. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.